All right, we're at seven after. As I said, we've got about 20 people who signed up, and when we get that many sign up, we'll have anywhere from three or four show up to as many as 10 or 12. So it just depends on various factors. So I think let's go ahead and get started. I want to really thank all of you for taking some time out of your Thursday to join us. This is the third in a series of webinars that Rich and I have done together. We did presentations on these topics at coverings this year, earlier in the year, and they were pretty well received. And we felt like with the limited time we had, there was enough interest. It made sense to just let's go ahead and do an hour-long webinar, get a little deeper, give folks to ask a few more questions. The other two topics we had, one was a benchmarking topic. Rich, as you can see the RockHeads logo behind him there, had some really good data on benchmarking to share, and it was really valuable, had a lot of interest. And then the other topic was on diversifying your business, going into different market segments, maybe bringing on different products, that sort of thing. And had a lot of good discussions there as well. Our schedule today, we're scheduled for an hour, so we'll do a formal hard stop at the top of the hour, but we'll also leave this meeting open for another 20 or 30 minutes. I do find when I do these webinars, sometimes there are people who don't want to ask a question in front of the whole group, or maybe they didn't get a chance to ask a question, something like that. So we'll just hang on for a little while afterwards. Anybody's interested and has he wants to do some one-on-one conversation. But when you signed up for the webinar, you had a chance to download the presentation. So we're going to assume you've had a chance to look over that. We're going to review everything in the presentation, but we don't plan to spend the whole hour going through a PowerPoint. This is really meant to provide some questions, give you folks a chance to ask questions. And so as we go through this, I'm going to let you manage your own mute.
Denver.
Okay. And then we've got a bit of a ringer in here with us, Chase Busenbark. Chase, you're muted.
Hi guys, my name is Chase Busenbark. My family they've owned a countertop company called Busenbark Flooring and Granite just south of St. Louis. I do business brokerage in the stone industry full time.
All right, super. Chase obviously doesn't own a shop, but he's got a lot of good experience on the topic that we're talking about here. We'll talk a bit more about him down the road. And of course, you may have questions specifically for him, but we've done some work together, and he's got a lot of good things to add here.
Please jump in, Chase.
Yep, definitely. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ed Young. You probably see me under the banner of Fabricators Coach. I've done a lot of coaching and a lot of work with a lot of companies in lots of areas and lots of industries. My first project in this industry was over 20 years ago. I have run a countertop fab shop for a few years. I've been a plant manager in different industries. And I've also owned my own brick and mortar business with a couple of locations. So for those of you who are owners, I understand how lonely that can be at times. But you're going to hear more from Rich than you will from me today. What you'll find out, number one, Rich has a ton of experience in this space. And as you'll come to realize pretty quickly, he's got a great passion for this topic. So he'll have a lot of good stuff to offer. Rich?
Does that mean don't be so loud, Ed?
No.
So, hi, everybody. Rich Katzmann, as you can see from my fake background, I run the RockHeads group. I've been doing that for about 2.5 years now. This will be kind of my one and only RockHeads commercial. 120 larger, by larger, I mean 5 million and up, shops across the country, all with the common vision that sharing information and making each other better is the best way for them to grow their business and be better. So we offer a lot of networking support, best practices, benchmarking analysis. We benchmarked, Ed mentioned before, we had a benchmarking webinar. I've got hundreds and thousands of data points from our companies. And so that's kind of what the RockHeads does. M&A is my passion. Right out of business school, I was an M&A kind of consultant right when the gas and electric utility industry deregulated. So there was a wild west, mad flurry of M&A activity out there that we helped companies with. I've started up a couple of businesses on my own. I've raised venture funding. I've raised family office money. Sold a company using an investment bank. We'll talk a little bit about iBanks on this call. Very similar to what Chase offers. So there's a ton of value. I really appreciate what he does because I've kind of been on it from the other side, trying to figure this stuff out on my own. So as Ed said, I love the topic. I can talk for hours on it, and I promise you I won't.
Now, you've also got some other experience in the industry other than RockHeads, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yep. So I ran Laser Products for 5 years. If everybody knows Laser Products, so that was a lot of fun. What we did at Laser Products related to M&A was grew the business, improved the EBITDA, cleaned up the business. A lot of stuff that we're going to talk about here. You would not believe the financials when I joined the company and how creative they were. So cleaned all that up and then sold the business to a strategic buyer out of Washington State, so that the owner of the business could retire. I then from there moved on and started up a multifamily commercial national installation company. So I'd cruise all across the country doing those projects. And then that just got, I think I actually did the math on how many hours I was working for how much money I was making, right? And I started becoming jealous of employees at McDonald's, right? So I got out of that business, joined the RockHeads, and kind of here I am.
Super. All right. Hopefully by at this point, you guys can see my screen. We'll jump into the presentation here. Our basic agenda, things we're going to cover. We'll talk about the different types of people who buy businesses. Rich has got some really good information on the different types of folks that you want to look at, and they'll have a big impact on decisions you'll make as a prospective seller. We'll spend a lot of time talking about what your business is worth and how the value of your business is determined, and then some different ways that you can actually increase the value of your business. Because if I talk about the theory and the book learning about this, we can't give you some practical ideas to help you out as well.
Lots of words, right, Ed? We're certainly not going to read through all of this, right? Because I know you sent it out to everybody. But this is just kind of a quick level set. There are multiple ways to value a business, right? You can add up all the assets. You can sell them that way. You can do some technical kind of math issues where you can talk about an internal rate of return. Our industry, which is great, is really, really focused on one method to value a business, which makes it really easy for us to have a webinar like that. And right, it's called EBITDA, right? And EBITDA, bunch of initials, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's essentially how much cash your company generates. It's how much profit your company generates, getting rid of things that aren't necessarily relevant to someone who may acquire it, right? I mean, you get rid of taxes, right? Because if somebody's going to buy your business, they have their own taxes and they have their own strategy with taxes and depreciation and all of that stuff. So you kind of get rid of the noise, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about EBITDA. And so the easy way, and we'll talk about this a little bit more on the next slide, that someone looking at your business, or if you're looking at another business, is to get to that EBITDA number, right? And in our industry, EBITDAs generally range from 3% of sales, if you're really grinding it out, right, up to about 20% of sales, right? And our industry average, and I haven't seen an updated number, but about 2 years ago, it was just under 5%. With a poll that somebody did, and that's low, right? If you were to walk down the street, I mean, most businesses in the country are operating closer to, 10% and up. So and Ed's nodding, good. I always like it when I get some confirmation here. So what happens, and then we'll move on here. This is fact. This is hard. What happens at a 5% EBITDA is, if there's any major changes to your business, you're at risk, right? If you lose a big company, if you lose, a big customer, if you lose 10% of your revenue, it puts a massive strain on everything you're doing, obviously cash too. So one of the things that we really try to drive people to is to get to double digits, right? Once you get to 10% EBITDA, you now can handle market changes, right? I mean, gosh knows we've been dealing with those for the last couple of years. So that's really where you want to be. So if we're talking, let's just talk 10% EBITDA whenever we do math here. So if you're a $5 million company, right? That means your EBITDA is going to be $500,000, right? So when we're talking about the value of your business, we'll get into the next slide. Our industry supports anywhere from a 3 times to a 6 times multiple. So if you're a $500,000 in EBITDA, you can expect $1.5 million for your business, up to $3 million for your business. That's probably 90% of the transactions that we see out there. Now, Chase, let me bring you into this. You're right in the middle of all this. With what you're seeing out there, are you seeing the same with a 3 to 6, or are you seeing something slightly different?
Yeah, I would say that, that's fairly accurate. Naturally, there's some variables that would be taken into consideration of that, depending on the size of the company and how profitable that company is. More the more successful companies with higher profits, say above the $3 million mark, are probably going to be at that higher EBITDA multiple, whereas the $500,000 company probably wouldn't be, that much. But there are some variables to that too, just as far as many other factors.
It also
Yeah,
makes sense too to get to that higher end the numbers that you guys are talking about. You really have to have a lot of that structure that a good buyer is going to be looking for. And we'll talk more about how to improve valuation factors that impact that, but you'll see that as a common theme.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree with Chase more, right? As you're bigger, it's all about risk mitigation, right? So if you're generating 2 to 3 million in EBITDA, you've figured your stuff out pretty well, right? So you probably have procedures in place, a strong management team. So it's not always accurate, but a higher EBITDA definitely signals less risk for someone who's buying the business.
Yep.
All right, you want to slide into the next one? There we go. Real quick, don't want to dwell on this, right? 4 major types of acquirers out there, maybe 5. There's a couple other smaller ones that we could talk about, right? Everybody knows about private equity or has heard about private equity. The key when thinking about private equity is back to Chase. You've got to be minimum $1 million in EBITDA. Really, they want you at 2, and 3 and 4 and 5, but you've got to be a larger company for private equity to really take a look at you. And when you're thinking about private equity, and I've been on the other side of this, they are driven. I mean, they are an investment vehicle, right? So they will buy you with the expectations that they're going to repackage you and resell you in 3 to 5 years. They're not buying you because they love your employees and they want better, home life for everybody involved. That you are an investment for them. And as soon as they buy you, you will feel that. You will feel pressures on spending and pressures on making numbers every quarter. So it's a great opportunity for an owner potentially to really drive up personal value. It's not necessarily the best thing for the business. Can be, but isn't. And if anybody's interested, there's a case study out there from a company called Clio, which was a private equity funded group out of Michigan that about 5 years ago rolled up, I think it was 8 different shops. They started in Atlanta, Kansas City, New York, and you probably know a couple of the other locations. They rolled all these shops up and built a really big kind of national countertop shop. And it took 1 year for it to implode.
You have call line 1.
And when it did, everybody got fired. And so there are some very scary private equity stories out there. Moving on from there, right? Strategic partners. We don't see a lot of that in our industry. That would be like a large cabinet company saying, all right, I'm tired of builders asking for a combination cabinet countertop solution, or I'm tired of subbing out to countertop guys. I'm going to roll up a couple of them and I'm going to be a cabinet and countertop company. We see a few of those, but not a ton. What we see the most of is this third one, which is local and regional competitors. So we are seeing a consolidation in our industry now across the country where there are large countertop shops growing and gobbling up smaller shops along the way. If you look at Flowform is all of a sudden is a $240 million company right now because they are buying shop after shop in the Pacific Northwest. Chris, keep your eye out. I think we chatted about this at the last call, and Canada, right? So they are growing like crazy. Cutting Edge out of Toledo, Ohio. There's a larger or a medium-sized company out of Dallas doing the same. So these guys have figured out that by acquiring other companies in other areas, they can get a lot of value in that and grow their business. And so that's what we see a ton of. So if you get a phone call, more than likely it's from another shop, might be 2 states away, might be 6 hours away, but that's what they're looking to do, is they're looking to grow into kind of your territory. And then as RockHeads, we have 3 or 4 guys that, and we haven't seen it as much lately. So maybe 2-3 years ago, we saw this quite a bit. Where someone, it's their career 2.0. Maybe they made a few $1 million in the tech space, or wherever they come from money or whatever it is, and they, for some odd reason, decide that they want to own a countertop shop, and come in, buy the shop, and then try to learn on the fly. We do see a lot of that too, but really the local regional competition, those guys are really the ones that we're seeing the most activity with. And again, Chase, I'd love your thoughts on kind of this idea too.
Yeah, Ed, you've hit everything on the head. I mean, as far as what I see, from a private equity, I see they have an addition, that roll-up company, the original platform company that's usually producing a couple $1 million in EBITDA, and then they'll do, add-on companies that are typically a little bit lower in EBITDA values. And but like you said, they're still going to be a profitable company. It's not going to make sense for them to come in and try and rebuild that business particularly. They'd like to see it from a 500,000 plus EBITDA value. But it's amazing the amount of buyers that I talk to on a day-to-day basis that are inside the industry, sometimes outside the industry, and all of these main headings here that you've mentioned are exactly what they are. So
nice. All right, this we just went over, so I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this. I'm trying to think if there's any key points here. Yeah, I mean, right. Let's just slide on from that.
Right.
It's a good chart, but I think I hit on most of it.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would emphasize here is what it's going to mean to your employees. A lot of shops have kind of a family atmosphere. You've got folks that you've known, that you've hired, you worked with for 10, 20 years. If you have a burning need for those folks to continue in that environment, understanding the differences between these types of buyers is really critical, because they'll have a huge impact on what your employee's life is like going forward after you're out of the picture. So I think that's kind of the big takeaway from this part of the conversation.
And let me just say that with Clio, the PE firm that I mentioned before, they literally let 200 employees go on December 21st. Completely unbeknownst to them. I mean, it was devastating, right? So that's a clear indication of again where their heads are at.
And I ran a plant for a company that was owned by private equity, American Capital Partners, which is a publicly traded private equity, one of the largest around in the country. And I've lived in that environment. I can tell you it's totally different than what probably any of you on this call are used to seeing. It's a totally different world. So it's important, I think, to pay attention to this as you start looking at selling, because it will have an impact after the sale.
All right, and a lot of this we hit on too. So just as kind of a recap, here you'll see countertop industry in bold 3.5 to 6 multiples, right? So again, you guys, we already did the math down here. So you guys can get a good feel for what your business is worth. On this slide, though, I'm going to do RockHead commercial number 2, Ed, sorry. We just had an hour-long webinar with the group where we had 3 large regional companies who are in the mode of acquiring businesses kind of talk, and it was an open roundtable forum. And so I have a whole bunch of notes from that I kind of want to go into also. And one of them right out of the gate is to get these multiples right. Everything in your business needs to be pretty clean. And the 3.5 to 6 are the good companies that have already made it through the door, that weren't turned down by these guys trying to acquire them, right? And so consistently, what we're hearing is, number one is your EBITDA, right? I mean, that really is, at the end of the day, what they're buying, right? So the normal structure of these deals is they will come in, they don't buy equity because they don't want any of the liability associated with your business, right? They don't want silicosis issues. They don't want past installations. So they will come in and just buy your assets, right? And that's how the deal looks. What they do then is they kind of terminate all your employees and then hire them the next day, right? That's just kind of the process that they go through. So any employment contracts that you may have with your folks kind of immediately go away. And by them doing that, if those individual employees have any health history, any silicosis issues, right, it's kind of stopped and started again so that the new company doesn't get that liability. So when you're thinking about your assets, what they're buying is all of your assets, because that's what generates that cash flow. So to think of it, well, I've got a building over here, or I've got a brand new CNC. That's all part of the equation that drives that multiple. So that's all in kind of to get this 3.5 to 6. The number one reason, and this is cool stuff, the number one reason I'm hearing that acquirers are walking away from deals is having too much concentration customer-wise. And one of the guys said, if there's any single customer that's more than 15% of your business, 15, it's really becomes risky, because nobody wants to buy a business and 15% of the revenue walks out the door, right? So as you're looking at your segmentation and who's driving your business, and you do have visions of maybe selling in 2 to 3 years, getting your customer segmentation is incredibly important when someone's looking at your business. And Ed, I see you nodding. What are your thoughts here?
I'm just thinking about scenarios I've been in this industry and others, where I've been working with a client where they had one customer that was 30%, 50% of their total annual revenue, and that customer has a downturn, or the management of that customer changes and they've got different priorities and they want to select their suppliers a different way. And the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into those conversations trying to figure out how to survive that change is horrendous. So yeah, that diversification in your customer mix is critical. Quite frankly, this conversation about valuations and multiples it's a sad conversation, quite frankly, that I have with a lot of clients, because they'll come to me for a number of reasons, wanting help with a number of things, but it all gets down to, how do I make more money? Then how can I cash this thing out sometime down the road? And I have a lot of folks who come to me, they've got a $3 million a year business. They think they're going to get a check for $3 million when they sell, and it's just not true, because they're earning 5% and they're in a scenario where if the owner pulls out of the business collapses, because the business is built on the owner. We'll talk about what drives those multiples in a minute, but understanding these numbers, I think, is critical, because I think it's really important to help set your expectations as an owner getting ready to sell your business down the road, to understand what reality is. And Chase, you and I had some conversations about this a while back on some podcasts. We've got this 3.5 to 6 range here based on some information that Rich and I have, but I think you had a scenario with a buyer that had a lender already lined up to help finance the deal, and the lender had their own multiple, right? Wasn't it like a
Yes.
2.3 or something because of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, the lenders do play a large portion in the transaction as well. So, I've came to many deals where the seller and buyer have agreed upon an asking price, and through that valuation, the lender has gotten business appraisals, real estate appraisals, asset appraisals, that all play a factor into what they're willing to lend on the business. And another thing that can play a factor too is, say, the real estate value in comparisons to the actual business value, and how that can be amortized, whether that's going to be over a shorter period because it's just the business, or a much longer period because there is real estate involved. And of course, the inventory, it plays a big part in that valuation. The assets, those play a big part in the valuation. And if there's a big, capital expenditure, because those machines are not valued like they were whenever you once purchased them. You take a couple machines that are valued at 500,000 and now they're 8 years old. And so that life expectancy is not much longer per se before a big investment's going to come, even though that goodwill is being generated on the profit that those machines are producing. So,
Hey, Chase, have you run into any situations where the seller has had some SBA loans on the business that maybe made things a little more complicated?
Are you saying the seller has had some SBA loans?
Yeah, the business seller had taken some SBA loans to help make the business work or to buy equipment over time, something like that. And that made trying to work out the sale, the details of the sale a little tougher to do.
Yes, it does make it a little bit tougher, depending who that loan is through. And sometimes, that machine is not even through, say, an SBA lender. It's through just say a machine lender or something along those lines. So now you might have debt on the business where you also have debt on the machinery from a third-party lender. So there's multiple lenders involved. So depending on how that sale would be processed, whether it's a stock sale or an asset sale, and generally speaking, more times than not, they're asset sales to reduce the litigation or anything moving forward for a potential buyer and reduce that risk. It does play a factor. Now, on an asset sale, most of the time, those loans will be paid off at closing. So through the escrow company, all that'll have to be free and clear through the purchase. Whereas a stock sale, the buyer could potentially assume those loans, and not all the time can they, Ed, going back to the SBA.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on the situation and how comfortable the banks feel in that situation for a potential buyer to assume previous seller's loans.
I asked because I had interviewed Aaron Crowley talking with him about the sale of his shop a few years ago. Aaron Crowley is the no-lift cart guy. And that was one of the challenges he had. I think I forget the details. I think he was selling the business, but he was going to still retain ownership of the land. And there was SBA money tied up in it. It got really complicated. So just something to keep in mind. If you've got something like that, it could get a little messy sometimes.
And Ed, what our guys are doing is any debt, any machine debt or whatever it is immediately being paid off, like Chase said, and that comes off, that the seller is paying for that, right? So if you're getting four times multiple and you owe 200K on a Titan, that 200K is being subtracted right from that number. So there's no free money out there, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Just again, I just kind of had this random list of notes that I took from our recent webinar. Number one on my list too, after the customer concentration, is you've got to have something to sell, right? So if your business is you are the contact with the customers and you are running everything, that's not very interesting to someone, right? You have got to be able to remove yourself from the operations, from the sales, for it to become an appealing business, right? And that's, that's why a lot of times the decision to sell should come 2 to 3 years before you're ready to do it, right? So that you can implement things like pulling yourself out of the business so that it could be packaged for someone else to buy.
Yeah, in fact, I think that's something I frequently get requests for. In fact, I had one a business that I think Chase has also talked with on the coast of Mississippi, where it's a business built around the owner. It's a second generation. They're ready to sell, and it's just not set up to make that transition. It's what I call the long pole in the tent scenario, where if you pull that tent pole out, the tent collapses. If your business is built on your relationships as an owner and you controlling and knowing every order and every customer that goes through that shop, and there's not a lot of delegation that's going on there, not a lot of reporting on that, that's the kind of thing that'll make it not only difficult to sell, but it'll also drive your multiple down.
Absolutely. Another element too, coming out of COVID, right, with the year over year 20% growth. And then last year, a lot of shops saw 10 to 15% pullback, another 10 to 15% this year. The guys I'm talking to want to see profit stabilization, right? And they all nodded and agreed. You can't just say, well, yeah, the whole industry's down, that's why we're down, right? You've got to show that you've either stopped the bleeding, you've turned the corner. So for many companies, and again, that's why we're seeing multiples getting driven down so low. Right now is not a great time to sell, right? Especially if you've been down for the last 18 months. That's when you're going to get a low ball offer, because the acquirer might smell a little blood in the water, right? And so timing is huge too on this. You got to show that you've turned the corner. And then my last note, and we'll kind of get back to the slides a little bit as a guide at, and certainly I want to open this up, for sure, is, again, kind of looking at my random notes. It's going to take 1 to 2 years to sell, right? And two's probably on the long end, but these negotiations, one of the shops we talked to have 8 pages of due diligence requests from you when they want to buy your business. And this isn't like, here's my QuickBooks P&L, let me know what your number is. I mean, this is months and months and months of work, and it's getting comfortable with each other, and it's them keeping an eye on things after they've met you. So now again, Chase, I love leaning on you. Thanks again for being here. I mean, would you say a year is average for, kind of first meeting to closing the business? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think I think that's about right. I mean, if it's just a super good scenario, you could say 6 months, but I would say a year is closer to average, definitely 9 months. And then, depending on some of those other factors, depending on the consistency of those trends in the P&L statements, depending on, it's been normal with COVID happening, 3 or 4 years ago, that a lot of buyers have been wanting to see 5 years. 5-year trends rather than 3, where 3 has always just been so common because that's what you're basing that business value on. But 5 years has been more consistent. So now you're pulling more reports out, breaking those reports not only by the total year, but down to the month, and comparing percentages. I call them common size reports, where you're showing the gross revenues and then percentages of each line item. I've looked at businesses with over 150 line items on how this business owner is breaking it down and comparing each one of those percentages to it. So, yeah, I would say a year's good on the larger businesses. It could be even a little bit longer. And it takes a long time for those buyers to analyze those documents, come back with their list of 10 questions, request more documents. But like you said, it's not uncommon to have 8 to 10 pages worth of due diligence on a business.
Yeah, one of the things that Aaron Coley talked about, I mean, he had a sweet deal where he had already had a third-party valuation done of his business. He was getting ready to sell. He was getting ready to put it on the market. He had a buyer that he knew very well. The buyer knew his business, and they came to a number very quickly and had a handshake deal. And it still took him, I think, 7, 8, maybe 9 months to close the deal. Because of all that. And two things to remember. One is that as an owner who's selling your business, this process is, as Rich and Chase are talking about, can take a year or more. That means you've got another job to run for that period of time while you're still running your business, because there's a lot of work that's involved in pulling this data together, answering these questions. Even if you've got things very well packaged up, it's still going to be a lot of extra work. So keep that in mind. And the other thing is, and Chase, you may have said this in a podcast that we talked about, I can't remember, but when you start talking to a prospective buyer, that buyer frequently has spent a lot of time understanding the sales process, understanding the buying process, researching the industry, maybe even researching your business. That in a lot of cases, the buyer shows up much more prepared for the transaction and all the details than the seller is in many cases. So that's one of the big advantages of working with somebody like Chase, who's got experience. He can help you get ready for that. But it's not that the buyer's trying to get one over on you. I mean, certainly they want to get the best price, but understanding that you're going to be talking with somebody who spent a lot of time thinking about and analyzing and studying how to make this process work and work well. And if you haven't prepared yourself, there's a big steep hill to climb, and you got a lot of work to do while you're still running your business. So that's a dynamic a lot of folks don't think about.
Absolutely. I feel like I can wear a seller out, just like you guys had said, it's almost like it's a part-time job for the seller to sell their business while they're still trying to operate the business and keep the numbers where they should be while maintaining the business during the most critical time frame. So I can tell just sellers sometimes with me, whenever I ask for all these different items, it can be a lot, right? It can be a lot on them, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much, I had no idea. But I am preparing them for what I know is to come in the next 3 to 6 months, and how we can try and mitigate some of those rejections or hurdles that we're going to have to overcome. So being prepared for that on the front side is definitely going to be important, because uh, and we did speak about that earlier, Ed. The buyers are very educated. More times than not, they're not just jumping in to buy a business. They're going to say, I'm going to buy a business tomorrow. I mean, whenever I speak with buyers and I get proof of funds, I ask them questions like, how long have you been looking for a business? Where are you located? What's the radius of the proximity that you're looking for this business? A lot of times it's not uncommon. They'll say, I've been looking for a year. I've been looking for 2 years to buy a business. So they've been through, say, a couple due diligence processes. And just because you get an initial letter of intent, or say that asset purchase agreement, it doesn't always mean that it's going to go through, right? They get into that due diligence process, and then they find one thing that's a turn off to them, and then you start over. So, and that's another thing that can take the sales process a long time, is because during that process you might tie up the business for 30 to 45 days, and then the buyer doesn't want to move forward, or they can't agree on that price point, the buyer and seller, and then so you start over from that process as well.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, as somebody who is growing a company to potentially sell it in the future, I think it's the sobering reality of the process and what the expectation is. I think, like you said, Ed, a lot of, I actually contemplated selling my company about 3 years ago, and I went down that path a little bit. And it was, kind of an eye opener. Like, you thought you were worth X, but the market said you were worth Y. And there was a big difference between those two numbers. And that was a slap in the face to me. It was like, okay, time to wake up. Instead of saying, oh, I could retire at this amount of money if I can only get this, and I think I'm worth that, it became, you're going to have to do a lot of work to get that money that you want to retire at. So I guess as it pertains to this, it's just a good kind of, cold, wet bath to, if you're going to go down this path, there is a lot of work. I know for me, my own perspective as somebody who's building a company to sell it, I put a lot of hours into that process, and I'm not even in the selling process. I'm in the building process, but it is a lot of time for me. And that goes on top of the day-to-day stuff I do. That goes on top of managing my team and my all that stuff too. And we haven't even gotten to the nitty-gritty yet. So I think, the takeaway is that prepare yourself if you really want a value that's going to change your life, whatever that number is. But if you want the top market values, and you don't want to be kind of underappreciated or undervalued, it's going to take 10 times the amount of work that you ever thought it would take. And at that, and I've had this conversation with Rich, the sad part is, at that, we are in a highly undervalued industry. We are underappreciated industry by buyers. They're not going to pay top dollar for our companies. And We also have some low EBITDA numbers across the board, like Rich was indicating too, 5% on average. So, we're getting paid less multipliers on less money, on less profitability. And so the amount of work it takes to get to the top echelon of where you are getting paid high end in our industry, which is still low compared to other industries, it's a lot of work. So that's my perspective. No real questions, because I spend a lot of time working through this type of stuff. But I think just an overall takeaway is, if you're an owner preparing to go to sale or build a company to sale, put your bootstraps on, because it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of work. So.
The good news is it's all achievable. There's nothing that's insurmountable. It's just if that's where you want to go, let's put together a plan, make it happen. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on?
So Ed, I would just tag on to that and say that I went down this road, and one thing that to tag to what Chase was saying about what you have to do to prepare for the owner that's potentially interested in your business. You could have more than one person interested in your business at a time, and you're answering questions from 2 or 3 different individuals and preparing information for them that might be different. So it is nights and weekends, and you need to work on this without people in your company knowing what you're doing as well. And that's a real key factor. So when you're ready to dive into the process, you just got to be ready to go. It's not going to be a picnic, but as Ed said, it is achievable.
Yeah, and I asked the group that's doing 1 to 2 acquisitions a year, heavily involved, if they have a preference, if there's a third party involved or not. Is there a Chase in the deal? Is there an iBank in the deal? And they all universally said, no, we don't mind that at all. We, to a certain degree, we prefer it, because the opinion is we're going to pay what we're going to pay. So if there's other money in there, if there's a middle person in there, they don't look at that as that's 3% or whatever the number is less. They look at it as, kind of what you said, Randy. They've got a resource now that does this for a living. And so they're going to be able to make the deal be so much smoother and go faster and be more efficient than the owners trying to do it at nights and weekends. So I think the universal, kind of the universal opinion out there is bring in someone who does this for a living if you haven't, right? And so that's where, someone like Chase could help out quite a bit. And then when you get closer, you have got to have an M&A attorney. Do not screw around with the guy who you bought your house from, or your corporate guy who, you have got to get an attorney that specializes in this. Because again, on my panel, multiple shops said they have walked away from multiple deals because they weren't using a lawyer that knows what they're doing. So that's a pretty easy one, but that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Once you get closer down the path, you've got to get an attorney involved.
So Rich, you think in the next 3 or 4 minutes, we kind of hit the high points on the rest of these slides so that we've got a few more minutes for questions?
Yeah, no, the good news is we've kind of hit them all, Ed. So, really the only thing that's kind of new here is processes and procedures, right? And we talked about, if you've got nothing to sell, if the business is in your brain, you have become uninteresting to someone acquiring that business. So you have got to build out your processes and procedures within your business. And not only is that good to sell the business, but obviously it's good to run the business too. So investing that time is huge. Everything on here we've talked about, clean financials. If your relatives are on the P&L, if they're employees, if your boat loan is in the P&L, you've got to clean up those financials. Because they're going to find it, and what it does is it raises concerns from the buyer. What other skeletons are in there, right? So immediately you've got to clean that all up. Everything else we've talked about, I'm going to pull back that second to last bullet that says ocean silicosis readiness, because my panel said they essentially don't care. If you're a dry shop, they're going to make you wet when they buy you. As we mentioned, they're not taking the liabilities of your business. They're not taking the liabilities of your employees with them. So I'm going to remove that one from future slides, Ed, because I learned something when we did that seminar a week ago.
Okay.
But yeah, everything else we hit in there. Right. Here's see benchmark session. We needed to reverse the order of this because that's already happened now. Make sure, right, first bullet here, second bullet here, chase what's relevant. We have even at the RockHeads, when we do our benchmarking reports, we'll have owners obsessing about tooling costs or silicone costs, right? And when you look at the P&L, it's such a small percent of their opportunity to save money and make their business better. Just make sure you focus on the things that are important, right? Like material costs running at 40% of your business, utilization, waste factors, all of that stuff. My Lord, if you start doing the math on just moving a material cost in your business from 40% to 35% to 32%, the amount of instant profit that drops to the bottom line is absolutely amazing. And then same thing with pricing. Pricing is free money, right? If you raise your price $2 a foot, maybe you pay a little commission on that to your sales force, but outside of that, that just flows right to your bottom line also. So when you're looking at improving your EBITDA, those are the two main drivers that really you should be focusing on as an owner. And then along the whole pricing side, there are, and Kevin and I have just recently started talking about this too. There are so many opportunities to upsell a customer that none of us are good at. And I always give the Amazon example. If go and put a TV from Amazon into your shopping cart and look at how many times Amazon asks you to add to that TV. If it's a protection plan, if it's a mount, a wall mount, if it's a this, if it's a that. Customers these days want to be given additional options. So give it to them, right? There's many different things you can offer a customer. A lot of them don't cost you any extra money. Again, dropping right to EBITDA and right to profit if you have little investment into selling those things. So that's our big thing. The last one, Ed, is yours, my friend. Scheduling and throughput, right? Share a little bit on how that saves you money.
Well, things I would encourage you to look at is how often are you changing your install schedule? If you're seeing that change, if you're driving those changes internally, either as an owner because you're giving certain customers preference or you're letting salespeople do that, all those changes in your install schedule are costing you money and you don't see it necessarily up front. If you're making commitments for install dates and you can't hit those because your fab process isn't working well or because your templater isn't getting all your data at template, that's costing you money. And the best way to attack that is to attack all the processes for how your data flows from point of sale to template. And what I see is a lot of shops just don't handle that well. And what that means is your templater goes out to try to pull all the data together so that your shop can be successful in doing a great job in fabrication, but we haven't teed the templater up for success. And so managing and controlling that process is really critical. I find in lots of cases that once we get those issues dealt with, we get the schedule settled down, we stop the changes, and we get the front office processes dialed in, it's usually a minimum of a 10% increase in capacity. That means you get 10% more work through your shop with the machines and people you already have. And I have seen it go up as high as 20, 30, 40% increase. So that's what it can cost you if you don't really address those very quickly.
That's awesome.
So to kind of wrap this up, so I want to be respectful of your time because you guys carved out an hour of your day to spend time with us. And again, we appreciate that. Keep an eye out for, if you're planning on going to TICE next year, keep an eye out for an extended presentation on this. The game plan is that Rich, Chase, and I will be together in a room, and we will do, I think it's an hour, maybe an hour and a half long presentation, get a deeper dive. Rich is going to have some fresh data. Chase will have new information with him. So we'll have updated statistics. And then again, we'll have a chance to have a lot more Q&A there. If you want to learn more about these topics between now and then, if you'll hit the Fabricators Coach podcast on whatever podcast platform you like, I've got 3 episodes where I interviewed Aaron Crowley about his experience selling his business a few years ago. I've got 3 episodes where I interviewed Chase about a lot of the technical details, and some of which we got into today. And then 2 more episodes where Rich and I talked about a lot of these different details, but we got a lot more in depth in them. So there's 8 episodes out there that you can go get for free right now if you want to start doing a little bit deeper dive into this. Thanks, guys. Hope you guys have a great day.